My first movie was like the first Russian language Netflix originals. And that kind of got a lot of traction because like Netflix was coming in and, it was getting an international, Russian movie was getting an international audience. The producers saw that movie early on and they, proposed for me to pitch on Master and Margarita, which was daunting. It was one of my favorite books as a teenager, and I reread it as an adult, and it was notorious for being a very complex book, which was impossible to adapt into a movie. And so I approached it in a way, it was like, this is, amazing proposition, but I can only do it if I know how to do it, in the sense of like how to structure a story from this modernistic text which has multiple storylines unconnected to each other, and it's to structure a story in a sense that works as a big movie. So I said, we'll have a think about, me and my co-writer, Roman, and we went away, and like a month we didn't have any ideas of how to do this, but then we started to research, like reread the book, go back in scholarly research, and gradually the concept kind of formed where we saw what this could be about and how it could be relevant for today as well. We pitched that to producers, and from then, that was like early 2020, everything went really smoothly at first. We wrote the script throughout the pandemic, shot in 2021. It was seen as a European movie then. Netflix was coming into Russia, Apple TV was coming into Russia. The movie was going to be distributed by Universal Pictures. We had European casts, so I saw it essentially as like, a European-Russian co-production, an international movie. We got the actors, the European actors I wanted. Russia was still very much integrated into the Western sort of culture then, and the shoot went great. We shot all of it by October 2021. And I had already been based sort of in LA, between LA and Moscow, but like mostly in LA. And I had an agreement originally that I was going to be editing here in LA. So I flew back to LA in October 2021. And I was just starting to edit the movie when Russia invaded Ukraine. And after that, everything changed. Universal Pictures pulled out of Russia. I made statements against the war, as any normal human being I thought should have back then. And just the movie went into limbo for a good year. So 2022, from the moment of the invasion, we had no idea if the movie would be finished. The edit sort of stopped. Post-production kind of went into a standstill. And it was only in 2023 when gradually like the project was reconfigured with like a smaller budget a little bit for post-production, and I got to finish the movie. But that 2022 was no idea if the movie would ever be finished. In 2023, up until the very end of the year, we had no idea if it would actually be released in Russia.
Нет никакого дьявола.
Эта земля полна суеверий, и каждый день здесь ждут мессию.
Вы сами, голубчик, во всем виноваты. Нельзя было держать себя с ним столь развязанным.
Каждый раз, когда я иду к вам, я боюсь.
Back then, I think there was some sort of state censorship going on in Russia. I'm talking about 2020. But it was very mild and nothing like today. Today we've reached like Stalin, like 30s level of censorship. Back then, it's crazy that has happened in really just 2 years, 2-3 years. But back then, like there were probably some themes you couldn't touch on. Like you couldn't get a movie done about Putin or about Navalny or about like contemporary maybe politics. But doing a classic novel which had commentary on censorship and authoritarianism, but from the different era, it was possible back then. And we didn't face. I can't remember. I mean, that was one of my conditions coming in, is that we'd have total artistic freedom in it, and that was fine. When we were coming up with the script, we were seeing processes that were happening in Russia at the time, and we were thinking about them and kind of saw the movie as a possibility to talk about where these processes could go, like both with censorship, artistic freedom, but we couldn't have imagined that in just the 2-3 years since we wrote and I would say like those themes are obviously a big part of Bulgakov's novel as well, but we brought them out in sort of the forefront in a more evident a little bit way because they're a little bit more concealed in the novel, and we couldn't have expected that they would be so timely. and resonate so much with the audience. So it was a combination of both. Like, yes, we wanted to kind of warn or talk about these issues with, you know, a wider audience and have them comprehend it through a film, through an artistic film. But on the other hand, we had no idea that they would, you know, be of such relevance. I mean, there were attempts throughout 2022 to kind of either take me off the movie, censor the movie. We had no idea. I mean, the producers just didn't know if they could even finish the movie with me. And they're definitely, like, as I said, originally we had artistic freedom, but by this time, a lot of the themes in the movie became tabooed in Russia. But I think the power of the novel being the most beloved novel of the 20th century and one of the most read novels in Russia. Also, the fact that the novel itself was censored back in Soviet times and was only released like 26 years after the writer's death, played into the fact that ultimately the movie wasn't censored, because it just, you know, it's about a different, as I said, it's about a different era. It's like, it's a classic novel. It'd look really weird for them to be not allowed, and also it was one of the most anticipated movies, even back then. Sort of like back in 2021, there was a lot of press about it, European actors, etc. So, like, I guess all of those factors played into the permission that the producers got to release it in Russia. I was not part of that release in any way. My name was not on any of the posters. You know, I wasn't at the premiere. Like, my name wasn't mentioned. So, like, that was one of the conditions, I guess, to kind of be able to release it as well. But none of that sort of, you know, stopped the propagandists and everything that happened afterwards. Like, it got the best reception, really, I could have hoped for, both from audiences and from critics in those first few days of the release. Overwhelmingly support with, like, you know, just... But right away, all of the audiences and critics picked up on the timeliness and the political aspects of the movie, and that brought the attention of the propagandists, who I guess watched it a few days after it came out, and that's when the attacks happened. So, like, about 3-4 days into the release, it comes out on a Thursday, or like, there was a premiere on Tuesday, and by Sunday, all of the propaganda channels were kind of going after me in the movie and saying, how is it possible that this movie was released today? It's a you know, anti-regime movie. The director's you know, against the war and speaking out. How is this possible? And that blew up to basically all of the propagandists and state TV, you know, calling for criminal cases against me and for the movie to be banned, and it reached the State Duma, so it kind of got all out of proportion. And that became, you know, a concern I didn't have going into this. Just that became the focal point of really, of the craziness of you know, of everything that was happening. But for many in Russia, that reaction of the propagandists kind of served as a reason to go watch the movie as well. And in a way that, you know, there is no real sociology in Russia at the moment. We don't really know what people think because they're afraid to speak. But in a way, at some point, this is not, I'm quoting some of, like, journalists and writers who were observing this, and they were saying that going to the movie was kind of like, became sort of like a silent assent. And I never experienced it myself, but I heard multiple people telling me and writing me that people were applauding at certain moments of the movie, which were anti-regime, and kind of applauding at the end of the movie, which is very rare, you know, just for a regular screening. So that was very heartwarming at the same time. So I had both the, you know, the craziness of the personal attacks and attacks against the movie from the propagandists, but the support of the audiences. The book itself is sort of about, has these satirical themes of criticism, of literary criticism and cancellations happening in Stalin's Russia of the 30s. The book is about that, and that's what happened to the writer himself, Bulgakov. There was kind of an irony in the fact that the same thing was happening to the movie, which is about the writer and his book, you know, 80 years later. And the attacks, kind of some of the, you know, criticism coming out of the propagandists against me or the movie almost cosplayed what the critics were saying back then without these propagandists realizing that, you know? So there was like a real irony of meta levels here. I mean, Navalny, I think for many or most of the people connected with Russia and wishing Russia to be part of the international world was kind of the symbol of hope throughout the years. And, you know, it's painful for us to see him jailed in 2021. And then, then when the Russia invaded Ukraine, it kind of felt like there's no way that the West could protect him, because before that, you know, there were sanctions that could have been imposed, but after the war started, like all those sanctions had already been imposed, so there was no really levers to kind of protect him, and you know, everybody had been speaking about how worried they are about him because there's really no way to control it. But I think we still, like, we all imagined this could happen, but we still all had a hope that it wouldn't. And, you know, that he would come out as the Mandela figure in X amount of years and sort of lead Russia into, back into the world and repent for what it's done. So the death was, you know, both expected and at the same time heartbreaking. As for, you know, one of his main messages was always to be brave and to stand up for truth no matter what, and that he showed that with everything that he did. Like, even in jail, he would be mocking, you know, the prosecution and joking and sort of never showed any fear, you know. And that's one of the themes of the novel and the movie as well, is that as a writer, as our protagonist sort of stands up to the system and does what he believes in. And there's a quote, even a famous quote in the book and in the movie, that cowardice is the worst of vices. So that's something I think that relates directly to Navalny. But after his tragic death, there was these stories that popped up last week, you probably saw them, where the authorities weren't giving his body back for many days and were trying to organize like a secret burial. And at that moment, many of the audiences and journalists kind of were picking up also on scenes from our movie where Pontius Pilate is sort of proclaiming that it's the Jesus figure, but he's not really Jesus in the book. It's like a Yeshua, he's called, to be buried secretly, and because this land is waiting for a Messiah, you know. So like there was a lot of parallels there, as there were a lot of parallels in other scenes in the movie with that we couldn't have ever projected or knew that would resonate. But there's, you know, the other scenes where like theater plays are pulled out of are canceled and saying that's happening in Russia, or writers are put in jail, they're saying that's happening in Russia. So there's like a lot of scenes that sort of resembled news, and this was a new one that kind of had some resemblance, and people were sort of picking up on. The movie is essentially about, it has many themes, but one of the main themes is like artistic freedom and censorship. That is a key theme of the movie. And right after the war started, I had this conversation with, you know, and I said, there's no way I'm going to censor myself because I'm making a movie about censorship, and so I'm not going to. And I think that anybody who has any platform, and I was never like a big, you know, influencer social media guy, but anyone who has any platform should step up now. It's like, that's the time. Like, you know, a horrible war is being instigated by a country I've been connected to, even though, you know, I'm not a citizen, but still. And horrors are being committed to Ukraine for no good reason except for the paranoia, nationalistic, imperial sort of craziness that's in the head of some of the tops there in the regime. So anybody should talk about it. And I, you know, obviously haven't censored myself in any way since then. My relation, I as then, the same now. I mean, I knew 24th of February 2022 I wouldn't be going back to Russia until the regime changes. That would be impossible. I kind of was a pessimist and thought that the processes that are happening now in Russia would happen, that it would just become more and more of a repressive terrorist state, sort of. I believe that the best way we can help Russia to overcome this is to help Ukraine win this war. and ultimately everybody who started this war is a war criminal. Some of the best writers, theater directors, playwrights, musicians left the country, and those are people that didn't plan to leave the country. You know, there's some that have like been kind of back and forth anyway, but yeah, a huge amount. And after the attacks started to happen on me, you know, the propaganda went after me, and the movie, I got a lot of support from, you know, some of the best people of Russian culture who had had similar things happen to them in the past couple of years. There definitely is a community. It's spread all over the world. It's not that many in LA. There's a lot in Europe and Berlin and London. Some are in Georgia and Armenia, like as communities. There's you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands that left. My heart goes out to the people left in Russia who can't leave. Like, not everybody has the, you know, possibility to leave who would want to, and that goes for, you know, directors, writers, actors, etc. And they are forced into a place of censorship at the moment, and forced into a place of fear, and won't be able to really make anything meaningful, in my opinion, in the next years, just because, you know, they either have to make propagandist movies now, or they have to kind of make fairy tales and escapist comedies which pretend that there is no war out there and the horrors aren't happening. I mean, I'm sure they will find ways, like in Soviet times, to kind of, through a different era, talk about what's happening today, but not anywhere near as close as what happened in Master and Margarita. I think our movie was kind of the end of an era, a movie from a different era. You know, like with the death of Navalny, the release of this movie, it's kind of like the end of the period of hope and the period of like any integration into the Western world.